Today's topic, we're going to discuss dormant establishment of warm season turf grasses. And Mike Skelton is online from Culpeper Parks and Rec. Many of you all heard Mike speak on Turfgrass Tuesday last year about many of the different items that Mike has employed at Culpeper. One of those being what he's going to talk to us today about his program for how he's grown in new Bermudagrass sports fields by Dormant Establishment. Mike, with that, if you can bring your screen up, I'll give you first dibs on introducing today's topic and tell them about the program that you have developed there at Culpeper.
I'm going to kind of give you an overview of why I did this. And one is in my arena, particularly in the world of parks and recs, the one thing I'm always lacking is space for practice. It's almost a 3-to-1 practice area requirement over how much you need for games. And so we're trying to limit the activity on our game fields. And so we started actually trying to produce fields in our limited spaces to allow to get a full coverage of Bermuda, but I had no irrigation in them. And so a friend of mine, Doug Horn, and I talked about this a lot. And we had some semi results, but we kind of keep narrowing it down to what we were actually able to do. And I'm going to kind of give you a recipe of what we did, and this is kind of overview of some of the things that we've done. And one of the things that we came up with that was a limiting factor for a lot of people, and that was the blankets, because that actually is a cost factor a lot of people didn't have. So I'm not going to go through a lot of this stuff, but because I really want to get down to the meat of it as to what we were doing. But I did have to make sure that I could get all my people to buy into this, because we were going to take areas out as early as October of the previous year, so that we could start prepping these areas for the dormant seeding that would take place in March. And so we did a lot of things up front. Got people to show that we were going to shut these areas down, but they were going to be eventually full Bermuda. And then we looked at the space that the minimum space that we could do that with, and that was about 3/4 of an acre, because I'm particularly talking about youth sports and not like a high school team or whatever. Although I do have high school teams practicing on some of my places. So I determined the area. Like I said, we were using blankets. I'm not going to do that anymore. Soil samples was a must, because most of these places are pretty poor soils and you don't know what you got. And so a lot of the stuff we did up early was to get the fertilization, the lime and stuff like that in place during the wintertime when we had time available. So we're also using what I would consider some of our downtime. You may not have a lot of downtime, but that's usually one of those. And as we started doing this over the years, on my slide, you see the one of the things that was such a factor was weeds and crabgrass. And so through talking to Dr. Askew and Dr. Goatley here, we started using quincrelach as part of our seeding process. And that was a key factor to making sure that we had less competition for the new seedlings coming up. And I think that was very, very key.
And Mike, you convinced me that it was, because I originally didn't think that was going to be that critical, and you told me it would be, and you are absolutely right. That weed control aspect is essential for this to be successful.
Well, the first time we tried it, Doug Horner, even though Dr. Askew had said it would work, we were kind of scared, and so we actually, although we established the field, we did one area with quincrelach and one area without. Night and day difference. And that same year, I think you remember, Dr. Goatley, we also was the first time, excuse me, that we tried the compost, and that was a new key factor to what we did as well. And so this timing here, this is, I think, is critical. I mean, for us, one, And I think Dr. Goley found out that the March time frame in some of his testing was it actually proved to be a viable time as well. But it just worked out when we had a dry down period to do it. So we started prepping the areas, and these were and this could be you establishing a new field. I mean, or as we were doing, converting just a common area over. So a lot of them we just aerated after the fall sprays to get out the vegetation. That's just typically a 2,4-D and a glyphosate. Then we seeded and everything about 5 weeks. Tried to get them as early as 5 to 6 weeks before our last frost date. We did, and then you see the blankets on there. A lot of this was we put blankets down, but we'll talk to, and Dr. Gottlieb can emphasize that we have proved we don't need those. And then we grow them in. So by April and May, you start having seedlings already, and you really get going. So again, this is kind of the recipe for October, November. Clear, do whatever you can to that area, get it prepped, because you want to definitely have good seed to soil contact, get your lime down, those type of things. And you don't want to do the 2,4-D late in the year, because that will have an effect if you're trying to, I think it's 4 or 5 weeks, Dr. Gottlieb.
You got to check the label, but there is a restriction there.
Yes, you don't want anything that's going to affect it later on. That's why I did it all early and just just let the area sit there dormant. Like I said, some of these places it still had overgrowth on it, but just sitting there, so I didn't open the soil and have to worry about erosion, those type of things. And so I got a dog coming to visit me. Okay, so this is one of the fields that we prepped. So this was in December. This was 2 weeks after our second spraying. So we pretty much cleared this whole field, and you're going to see the whole process here. And you see on 8th of December, pretty much just dead out, and we're going to let it sit there most of the winter, just like that, just in a state that we're, like I said, that way we don't have to worry about erosion control. Mm-hmm. So then all of a sudden we take, and so everything you're going to see here on this slide, we do in 1 day. Okay, so we go in there, and at seeding time, it's about 5 to 6 weeks prior to our, so typically we've created as early as like the first week in March, and sometimes as close as to the last week in March. And that all is based on Mother Nature, what she gives us the ability to get out there. And so that's kind of what we've been trying to do that. We fertilize it. We go in there, we put a fertilizer down. We seed it at 1.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And that would be about 1.25 pounds of pure live seed. And it's about $20 per 1,000 square feet. And Riviera, I'll have to say, is kind of being phased out. Same company, Johnson's has Monaco is a newest.
Monaco, yep.
Yeah. We do shallow seeding. We go 2 directions on the seeding, and we apply the quinclorac right on top of the seeds. There's no problem with doing that. It's all labeled for that. And the next key factor was the 1/4 inch of compost, and that is elixir that I never really expected. You don't want to go any deeper than that, because then you start affecting the germination of the seed. So, and then like I said, we were doing blankets, but I will tell you, our research has proved that you don't need the blankets. So here we are, we just aerate the area, like I said, and so and this is all done the same day, or within 2 days of each other. Then we start seeding, and that's a seed evator, and you can see the spacing of the seed, not real close together, but also this, remember, is a grass that has stolons and rhizome activity. So once it gets going, it covers very, very quickly. There's us putting the quinclorac right on top of the seeds, right behind the seeding. And there's Mother Nature's best fertilizer, compost. And you can see it's very light, and it's only, like I said, it's less than 1/4 inch down. And that really is, we found, one of the best ways to do it. And finally, we did cover with blankets. This field was covered with blankets. but Dr. Goldie and I definitely know you don't have to. I will say one of the good things about a blanket though, is keeps people off of it. They don't want.
Yeah.
It's
And
just.
Mike, I think we both would agree that if you could use blankets and compost in anything we're going to show you today, there is definite benefit to either or both of these as far as supplemental treatments, but not being that they are absolutely necessary either has been the great thing to see.
No, I think I'm trying to say both, but I mean, if it's an area where you're concerned about people getting off of, and you have blankets, use blankets. And you're going to see when we pull the blankets, what type of activity is actually happening under there. And if you don't have the blankets, you have to be a little more patient, because Mother Nature takes a little while to get the moisture and the heat back in there, where this creates that perfect environment where you have, it's a greenhouse effect. So holds heat, holds moisture, all those things. And so for us, it was just start checking afterwards to make sure the blankets are secure and see what's going on. And this is what's going on, 13th of April. So we planted in the 25th or 26th of March, 13th of April. Those are little seedlings just taking off. I mean, you have a lot of grass early, and the sooner you can get it going, the better. So.
And that would be one of the advantages of the blanket there for sure, is that has got those temperatures up to where they're popping.
Yeah, because typically we didn't see this type of germination until, what was it, late April, early May, Dr. Goatley, with the
I would guess normally we're going to be up into May before we'd see these seedlings coming in. So you're picking up at least 2, if not 3 weeks by using that blanket.
Yeah, it was a big factor having them. And so, but now we're still leaving the blankets on here about another 3 weeks. So we like to look at the frost date to get that out of the way before we start. We have to worry about those new seedlings getting hit by heavy frost. That's kind of the main reason behind that. But like I said, they even uncovered with compost. We made it through some pretty harsh years. And but like I said, don't want to leave it on too long. All of a sudden you're going to start getting disease. It's a perfect environment for about growing all sorts of fungi under there. Now that is what we see, and this has been our experience every time under blankets. That's 4-inch tall Bermuda, just flat out grown. And so from March to May, that's where you're sitting. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have that much grass on the ground going into the growing season than just trying to start it in June. That's
you've got something to work with there.
Absolutely, and it's just ready to go. And so these, I think the other thing that we've talked about before is, if you do have irrigation, be patient, let this happen, and my gosh, what you're going to be playing in June.
Yeah.
You're going to be so much ahead.
But that has been the big thing that we tell people about this, Mike, and you've already touched on it. But again, if you had irrigation, what an opportunity to make this even better. But every year that we've done this now, we're into year 4 or 5 of playing around. The key has been in the mid-Atlantic. We get enough rainfall here that, we're successful without having irrigation, because in the sites you're using, you didn't have it if you wanted it.
Right.
In mine, we've winterized our irrigation system, and we're not going to go out there and fire it up January, February, March in my situation to try to irrigate frozen soil.
I guess my point is, do this, and then when you pull the blankets and you do need to put moisture down, then you got a chance to push it. Because at this point, we're still dependent on Mother Nature to provide the moisture. And but you're going to see in here, I've never had a field not 100%. In this whole process, and we've done 7 fields. I forgot about that, 7. So we've done 7 this way, and every year I've had 100% coverage and ready to go in, and we've been activity on them in August when we start our winter sports.
And Mike, when you tell people when they see that grass, I mean, that's so impressive to see how much is there, but that field's obviously not ready for heavy traffic. So you're coming to it, but go ahead and set the stage for what you're going to be doing.
Well, and we're going to get in. Yeah, we're going to move in. One of the things is the beauty of, or the big benefit of Bermuda is not at this height, because it is not very strong at this height. It's leggy. All those what you're seeing there is really it'd be pretty, but it's not going to give you the wear tolerance and things that you need. That's a benefit of this grass. And so you've got to, and that's one of the process of at this point starting to get it mowed down so that it will actually start producing those stolons and rhizomes and get the density and level that you need to handle activity on it. You let a Bermuda get up 2 inches tall and it's not going to take traffic. It's got to be kept fairly tight. And so this is what we start doing as soon as we're ready to start mowing. And we have problems with, we still have some problems with crabgrass and, some other things, and goosegrass. Unless they got something new, I have no way to get goosegrass out.
That's a tough one.
Nothing. But we usually use a good old screwdriver, if it's manageable in the first season. And nutsedge and other broadleaves, we've been just successful using quincrelac. We've done a second application of that, and we have used some monument out there just to get rid of some other grasses that may have kind of tried to come through to clean it up. We let it harden for really not very long, 3 or 4 days, and then I said 5 days, go out there and try to do our spraying or whatever, give it time to get adjusted. And then we start our fertilization, and we're on the nutrient management program. And so we're putting down like 0.7 pounds, usually by this, we'd only get in 3 applications that season, after it's established. And then the next year we start our pre-emergent, and you're just your normal, activity on a field. And so this was the same field, the 29th of May, and we're not 100% covered, but we're pretty daggone close. And we're mowing at it we were just doing it at that time with a 0 turn at 1.5 inches. And you can see we've been tracking it different directions or whatever, and just pushing the mowing. And that's a decent field, but there's June and it's ready for traffic. And again, no irrigation and fabulous field.
And so, Mike, we see those pictures, and again, we saw that our colleagues at University of Arkansas, doing this and being very successful as well. In Virginia, most people would just be putting their seed or sprigs in the ground
yes.
Mid-May to end of May, and here you are looking at essentially, you said almost full coverage, and by the end of June, there it is.
There it is, and I can't emphasize that more, because it literally, we are limited to very few growing days. You want 100 good days like this, beautiful sun like that on that picture. For that Bermuda, it needs a hot, a lot of sunshine. And if you're just getting the seed in the ground, you don't have the growth that you really want by that fall. And because literally, a field like this, we are in August, full-blown activity on them, soccer, football, out there, typically practicing, not necessarily games, but practicing. And and like I said, you're just now getting seed maybe to germinate if you're seeding. And you would not be able to seed this field without, it would not happen. You put seed out there, on a bare ground in June, what, 2% maybe, Dr. Gutley?
It may be. Again, if you had a wet year like last year, maybe it would make, but you certainly wouldn't be using it that season. No. And in a normal weather pattern, whatever normal is anymore, you don't get enough frequent rainfall events to have a successful growing.
Right. So like I said, that's what it was. So these are actual photos of that field. It was just a patchy, weedy, whatever, and that's what we ended up with. And so it was shut down in October, November timeframe, and that's what we had in. I think that photo, I'm sure, was like July, but that's what the whole field looked like. That type of density, no irrigation, and that's proof. Okay, that's that's proof that it worked. There's that December after we did all that, and can't say anything different. That is Bermuda. Dormant.
And you've done it, what, 7 times now, and it's worked in every situation.
Every situation, even some bad ones. We've had places where we had really dry times earlier on when this should have been going well, and it surprised me every time that this has worked. But like I said, I think the key factor that has been more successful, although the other fields definitely came in, the quincunxalia, something to control the crabgrass and the weed, because that also controls some of those other weeds. It acts as a pre-emergent against some of your other weeds as well. And the factor of the compost. And a 1/4 inch of compost, I mean, I just can't tell you how great that is. And where you're seeing this green down there, we've been taking, we use the advantage of taking Bermuda, let it do what its thing does. And so we usually about two spray a nozzle with every year and just spray out those areas with Monument, knock down the cool season grass there and let her spread. So we start off with a field this size and we usually expand them out as far as it will go. It's not quite to the fence on the left there, but it's pretty close. So that's just saying it works. And then Dr. Goldie asked me to talk about, I don't know the interest of this next one, but buffalo grass. I don't know how many people have that or even thinking about that. I had areas that I was really I'm trying to move quickly, Dr. Goldie.
You're fine.
Okay. We had areas, our islands in our parking lots. And this, I don't know if anybody has those in there that they have to take care of. They're really there's a lot of extra work that I was trying to eliminate. And I thought of a lot of items or everything from, I guess some type of ground cover spread or whatever. And nothing seemed to be something that was going to work in a heat sink. And so I started thinking about this, and we decided it's also a seedable plant. And so we said, let's give it a try. And so I literally stuck my islands throughout my whole park and started tilling them up and preparing them. The same thing. I sprayed them out in the fall, let them set and then we started, doing this in March. And I weighed out my seed. This is ounces, not pounds, so it's ounces. So I'd weighed out my seed to the amount that I need to cover the area. And thank goodness I did, because my little hand spreader wouldn't spread those. Those are big seed. They
really large seed. Now, Mike, you did your homework on this, talking with the folks from University of Nebraska to pick their brains on kind of what they had for what was a variety and is what to do for weed control, right?
Yeah, because actually it was kind of funny, because when I did talk to Nebraska, they had the same problem we had with the Bermuda, and that was you go to try to seed this down and you would have such a high pressure weed issues. And so we talked a long time, and that was when we decided that we could use the quincunxalia or Monument. I mean, not Monument, but Tenacity as well. Either one of those would work on this. They were labeled as well. And so but they also gave me this particular seed is called Dancer, and it was one of the ones that they were using primary for people's lawns, and it's a very high quality, and it's a low growing compared to some of the ones. I think 6 to 8 inches, 4 to 8 inches. I think is the height according, and so I was looking for something like that as well, and then something that could take this tremendous dry area of a parking lot island. And so this was our go. So we had to hand spread the seed, and we had to hand spread the compost. And if you look kind of the greenish dots out there, they're not very close together. I mean, it's still, and like I said, I did it by weight per the size of the area. So that's what it looked like when it's getting going. And so now we just turn it over to Mother Nature and hope she gives some moisture and those type of things. And So by the 4th of April, a little bit later than, you know, and probably would have come up sooner, we had some of the blankets or whatever. But you're going to see there's a little crabgrass in there too, but those longer leaves are the buffalo grass. And that's a pretty daggum good coverage, even, you know, on those islands on the 6th of June. And these plants are like typically like the Bermuda. June is when you usually start planting. Late May, early June is when you usually start trying to put them on the ground and to get them going. And there's July. And again, no irrigation, anything. And so that proves that it works too. That's a dormant buffalo grass in December. And we did have a little, one of the things that is not good at is fighting other weeds and stuff like that. So we have gone through, and you do have to utilize a pre-emergent on it. But also what I've discovered is if it gets leggy like this and long like this, it really has a tough time fighting out the weeds. And so we've gone to mowing once a month. So instead of once a week, you know, once a month. And so we're keeping it about 2.5 inches, and we're getting a lot better density out of it. So that's what I had. And if anybody has any questions, or that was my go.
Mike, what do you think in terms of, well, you've also done this now with Zoysiagrass, correct?
My results in Zoysiagrass are two. One, I tried it with and without blankets. And if I don't have blankets, I had a very tough time getting even a decent coverage. But with the blankets on a seeded, which is the Zenith seed, I had 100% coverage. But the areas where I went to just seeded on with compost over it, maybe 10% coverage. You know, it was just, I don't know I would thought it would have gone the same route, but it proved me wrong. You know, but like I said, that's been my results, and I've tried that twice, and same results both times. So
Good deal. All right. Well, I will call up, if I can, my presentation here. Full screen. And so what I did was basically build upon what Michael did there, because we've been talking about this stuff, and Mike actually did some of this work as well, which was the precursor of us to expanding on this. But it was with the success that he had demonstrated with the seeded Bermudagrass. And again, anyone that might be watching us or listening to us from a cool season perspective would tell us, well, we've been doing this with Kentucky bluegrass for years. And I know at STMA this year that I was talking to a lot of people that told me there's going to be a lot of dormant seeding of bluegrass because many of the establishments had failed from too much rainfall last year. So again, the dormant concept has been tried, but not so much with these warm season grasses. And to really go outside the box, we were curious, could we achieve the same level of success if we were putting a vegetative Bermuda, so a sprig Bermuda, into the ground? And what I'm going to show you today is part of Matthew Herman's master's student candidate at Virginia Tech, working with our athletics department, put together this presentation. And this one covers the prospects of successfully establishing Bermudagrass sprigs at a dormancy period. And Matthew's goals were many things. Mike mentioned this, and it's a very real world reason for why would you try this now, is because maybe you got the opportunity to do some things before you get into the blowing and going management of an actual growing season. So if you could take advantage of this, it's more power to you. Could this lead to earlier use of the turf as a sports or golf turf venues? We want to take a look at that. And the biggie that we have mentioned before is in both of our situations, we did not have or chose not to use irrigation. So again, if you had irrigation, I think that would be a huge benefit, just as we talked about in Mike's segment. But again, this was even more risky from the standpoint of putting vegetative material in the ground. you have no irrigation, can you take advantage of those winter spring rain events to get successful establishment? We were wondering, could it fail? And 2019 would have been an interesting year to try this, Mike. I don't know that we could have got sprigs in the ground as wet as we are. I don't know that sprigs could have been harvested. So we did 2 years worth of these trials in 16, 17, and 17, 18 winters, but frozen soil and sprig unavailability might be an issue for you. Would the extreme cold kill these sprigs? Because I think Mike he hit the sweet spot with his March, and I think you'll see here in the data for these dormant sprigging studies that I still think that's a pretty solid planting time, but I also wanted to be crazy extreme. So we were putting sprigs out in January and February as well as March and April. And if you stuck them in the ground that early, could you possibly lose your investment? And if you should happen to have a dry winter, wouldn't winter desiccation be a possibility? And I think the answer is yes, it could be. That was not a problem, hasn't been a problem for a few years now. And looking at our weather patterns, we generally think that that's one of the reasons why this might work for us. We are most appreciative that Game Day Incorporated out of Chantilly, Virginia, that Mike Sullenberger and sent team down to do the row planting for us. If you haven't seen a Bermudagrass row planter, that's what you're looking at here in this picture. And some of what Mike did, all we did was basically pre-treat an area with glyphosate back in the fall to ensure that we controlled essentially everything there. We did no tillage, any type of other prep here. We basically just planted into that glyphosate controlled area and put the sprigs into the slits that you'll see here as we go through. So the fall application of glyphosate just took out what was a mixed stand of cool season grasses and weeds. We used a very cold tolerant variety, very popular in the transition zone as a vegetative Bermuda called Latitude 36. The planting rate was roughly 800 bushels per acre. Ballpark, that turns out to be about 25 sprigs per square foot of area if you actually get down on your hands and knees and count what is in place. And we also want to thank Oakwood Sod Farm for providing this material for us to make this possible. And our planting dates in these two trials were January, February, March, and April. And within those areas, those will be considered as our whole plots in terms of the research, because this was a replicated research trial that we conducted over 2 different winters. So there's what it looks like after the Game Day folks have made it pass. A lot of that material is laying on the soil surface. It's not going to make it, but there is material in the ground there in those furrows that it's created with the roller. And as someone said, well, could you improve your stand establishment by top dressing? My answer would be, I bet you could. But again, the lowest input that we were trying to achieve here, we basically just ran the planter across the area and called that good. And similar to what Mike did, but we changed up our source. We used the evergreen blanket from Covermaster because I was looking for one that in particular would give us the most heating ability underneath here, especially when we were putting spring January. And we also did a cover treatment and we did a compost treatment at 1/4 of an inch depth as well on top of these sprigs after the sprigs were row planted. We had 6 by 6 foot cover treatment subplots across the whole plot, which was the planting month. So we put out a compost treatment, an evergreen turf blanket, or we combined those two as a treatment. And we also had an uncovered control in which the sprigs simply were placed into the ground by the row planter, and we did nothing additional to that. It was a randomized complete block design of those cover treatments within each of the planting months of January through April. And again, for the purpose of this trial, we wanted a worst case establishment scenario, so there was no supplemental irrigation applied at any time. For our weed control, since we were going with the vegetative material, we talked to Dr. Askew, and he said, you know, your standard is Ronstar. For this type of establishment. So instead of using Fluororac at establishment, we put out Ronstar 2G at 200 pounds of product to the acre. And then we did make any type of cleanup because eventually that Ronstar, especially when you're going out early you're going to lose that control. And you saw how much surface disruption there was in what we were doing here. Quite a bit of weed pressure starts in these. So we did have to make supplemental applications of Revolver and Drive later on to clean these plots up. And I would always tell everybody, again, as good as we think this is, the weed control is definitely something that is going to have to be addressed to achieve success. We started mowing the grass when it was needed. Basically, this was our decision was made. We pulled the covers, very similar to Mike. As soon as we got through with our last frost date in Blacksburg, which typically takes us into the first couple of weeks of Blacksburg weather, when we get past our last possible frost date, our decision was we want to take the covers off and start mowing. And as some of my colleagues in research have watched this presentation before and have suggested, what do you think would have happened if you kept the covers on? And I said, I think the covers would have continued to accelerate that grow in, but we also wanted to pull these things off and basically not have to give them so much attention for the potential of weeds and diseases going underneath the blankets. So we pulled them off both years on the 10th of May, which is our last average frost date in Blacksburg. Okay. We fertilized at the maximum level according to our nutrient management standards and criteria in Virginia, which is 0.9 of a pound of water-soluble nitrogen per thousand. And that was applied monthly from mid-May through mid-July. And we assessed Bermudagrass coverage with a software package, a digital imaging analysis package. We used what was available for free, Canopio from Oklahoma State. They gave us an assessment beyond just the naked eye looking at it for coverage. Took those data, and what we were looking at was I made the decision that in terms of vegetative planting, that I felt like this turf could have been used as a limited use sports field or a golf course fairway once we reach 90% coverage, because 90% coverage doesn't leave a lot of gaps out there that would affect playability and footing. And I'll report to you what I'll term as Julian calendar date in the days after what would have been our typical June 1st planting date in Blacksburg, because that's about the time that we normally tell people you start sticking sprigs in the ground in our portion of Southwest Virginia. This is to give you an idea kind of what the Canopio data look like. You see how it picks up green, brown, et cetera, and how we get an assessment by using technology to give us some feedback here in terms of actually how much coverage is in place to do that. And all these treatments replicated 4 times. We ran the statistical analysis to see just what the heck happened here. So again, this is part of Matthew's research program there at Virginia Tech. And if you look a little bit here at the data, and I apologize that you got a Celsius scale there, but again, these were both typical winters for us, and each one of them experienced their in January some temperatures that went down pretty much close to 0 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, i.e. it got plenty cold for some of these grasses to be in the ground, in which you would assume that possibly there would be some winter kill. And I'm sure there was of some of those stems that were probably laying on the surface, but again, we anticipated most of those were of no value, and what was going to make us or break us was going to be any of the stems that were in the furrows, the rows that were planted. And of course, we also had cover compost and cover or compost treatments out there to see if those might be a key to success. In the rainfall totals, again, you see some variation there. We had a very wet January followed by a very dry February in 2017, the red bars. And then in 2018, it was a very dry January, and then we had crazy amounts of rain in both February and March. So we kind of spanned the possibilities in terms of rain when these things were in place. So again, rates. You notice that I removed April, and why I pulled April was because we did not end up getting a complete second year's worth of data, and I'll touch on what I think might have happened. But what I would consider the most challenging months for success, January, February, and March, actually over the 2 years of this trial turned out to be the months that worked the best for our efforts at dormant sprigging. So our analysis of variance said that cover treatments did not significantly affect the number of days to reach that 90% Bermuda cover, i.e. The blanket, the compost, or the blanket and compost treatment really did not do that much for us compared to the uncovered control. Now remember, the blankets were pulled in both those treatments on May 10th, and I have no doubt that if we'd let the blankets on, that we would have continued to crank out more Bermuda growth, and that would be something for the manager to decide. But our idea was get them off, start mowing, let's incur lateral spread, and let's take paying attention to what's going on underneath the blanket out of the equation. Our analysis of variance also told us that between the 2 years, they basically behaved the same. So we didn't have a significant year in planting date interaction, and I combined these data across those years. And again, I pulled April data for talk about because we simply did not have enough establishment in the second year to really say it grew off, but most of what grew off, I felt like was probably things moving over from our earlier months treatments, and what little bit was there, it still made it, but I felt like it did not give us what I thought were reliable test results to talk about in this case. And here's why I think, and you say, what could be possibly something that might not work about this concept? The same time when we were doing our row planting on the plots at the Turfgrasss Research Center, we'd gone over to the Virginia Tech golf course, and we were just putting those same latitude 36 sprigs into the ground in a mixed cool season fairway here on a par 3 hole. And you see here, right to left here in this bottom row, January, February, and March. And this was a shot I took this past winter here, just after Christmas of 2018. January, February, March, you see quite a bit of latitude has established just cutting these sprigs into that existing turf. But note the April block here in this first run. One of the things we'd always hypothesized was, well, in a bad year like 2018, isn't it a possibility that you could get sprigs that have been damaged? I would say that that is a possibility. Again, I can't swear that that's what happened, but in looking at these first 2 rows, there's not a lot of Bermudagrass there, and that correlates very strongly with what we saw in our trial at the Turfgrasss Research Center, is that perhaps this is one of those cases, and it's hard to tell what's a living in a dead sprig to do that. And I feel like maybe we just didn't quite have the material, the health of the material. And again, it's nobody's fault, because how do you know when you're working with the dormant plant material? But we felt like that was part of what was in play, and that's why I pulled these April data from today's discussion.
Dr. Goatley, got a question back there.
Please, sir.
Okay. Did you treat that area at all prior to seeding? In other words, you knock it down, it was just whatever was there?
We did nothing to it, Mike. All we did was show up to into the existing fairway turf, which was kind of a mixed stand of bent grass, bluegrass, ryegrass, you name it, a little bit of everything that's out there, and simply cut the sprigs in.
Are you looking at would the issue have been the canopy was keeping the sprigs from going?
Could be, but even at that time of year, for April, it still hasn't really started popping yet. But that's a fair question, and that could be part of it. But we just saw, if you think back to the Turf Research Center where there was no competition, we did not have any establishment there either, even underneath the blankets. And so my thinking is that mostly what's going on here is again, if I had to hypothesize, I'd say maybe these were weaker sprigs compared to others, just purely by chance of possibly where that particular batch was harvested. And again, I'm guessing, but this particular site, there was, we did nothing to it. It never even was fertilized during the year. All it was done to it is it was mowed. So no irrigation, just stick the sprigs in the ground. And could we convert cool season to warm season by dormant establishment is what this little trial was about.
Right.
Within these 3 months that I will report today, the sprigging dates you see over here on the left, January, February, and March, okay? The mean number of days after sprigging, the day it was sprigged to reach 90% cover, you look and say, oh, it took 164 days in January. Well, when I look at these data, of course, they are statistically significant, but that means these sprigs were in the ground that much longer. And you could debate good thing or bad thing, because as Mike had shown, and we had done some other work to see, it appears that March is kind of the sweet spot for doing this. The mean Julian calendar day, okay, of the year, You see almost is the exact same. And what this means over here, what something it means to you is that putting these sprigs in the ground January, February, or March, and these always went in the ground typically the third week of those months. Okay, you see July 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Those are the dates that these plots reached 90% coverage. And so it really didn't make any difference whether they were planted early or, again, maybe you gained 2 days, but, does that matter? And I would say, no, it doesn't make any difference. Basically, if we had looked at this from the standpoint of a typical June 1st sprigging in Blacksburg, just to give you an idea, that's the norm. This would mean that, hey, you've achieved a successful grow-in, which we could open up for limited play in 33 days. Now, again, we see fields done like that in the warmer parts of Virginia, fairways too, that good, but not going to be as far along as maturity as what we have achieved by the dormant planting date. And just an idea, you look at some of these pictures, you can see C plus C is always where there was cover and compost. And so when these things came off, this is May 26, 2017, you see how much more green was there. But when these things came off, we initiated our fertility and regular mowing program. Then basically what we saw happen was even this check, as weak as it looks compared to the compost and cover treatment here in the February block, it basically caught up and was equal to the other plots by the time this trial was complete. So here's another shot. This is what they looked like in June, June 13th of 2017. And again, you see how the different months, you see how far behind that April is there. And again, you look at these and say, as Mike pointed out, the sweet spot seems to be that mid to third week of March as being the time. But note that it worked in both years quite well, quite successfully, even in January and February. And there you are reaching that grow-in point. Again, the only ones that were further behind, April, and again, in the ground, less time. So here's January, February on top, bottom right. Look at March. And again, that's essentially a limited use sports turf. Definitely could use an open up golf turf that has been grown in without any supplemental irrigation. At this point in time, really only 2 pounds of nitrogen ballpark per 1,000 square feet and simply mowed. So little weed control, got to have it. But again, what a successful process without having supplemental irrigation. And you could not do that in the middle of summer, even in Blacksburg, without irrigation. So summarizing this part of the days after planting, March, February, and January, as you expect, if the sprigs go in the ground, essentially they sit there and they wait until Mother Nature provides them the ability to do their thing. And that's where the March planting possibly has the advantage of less things that could happen to the sprigs. But again, January and February both did work quite well. Based on the Julian calendar date, okay, it's either 185 or 186 days, but they all came out somewhere to be right around the 4th of July, in which we reached that 90% coverage rate. And again, if you think about it from the standpoint of a typical sprigging date, it worked. And it had you on these turfs in basically a month's time. In 30 days if you were still out there compared to trying to do it on a normal planting date. Some of the things we want to continue to look at is expand these trials that would include January through those recommended planting dates of June to see if, again, is it really making as much difference as we hypothesize. And the other one would be to leave the covers on until everything reaches 90% and see just how far could you push them with the covers, knowing that there are some give and takes involved with leaving the covers in play. And the third thing would be to how much traffic could we introduce into these different areas with our simulator to give people some sense of how much they could be used. Mike touched on it would be extremely critical on that seeded Bermudagrass to very carefully watch traffic. A sprig situation, that grow-in is a little bit different since there are so many more stems, but of course that is still a very immature turf in its own right there. So these are all the folks that made that possible. Game Day Incorporated, Oakwood Sod Farm, and then everyone that works at the Virginia Tech turf team that provided all of the field support to do this. John Dickerson, Whitney Askew, John Henson, Adam Goatley, and Kit Luke were all involved in this project. So my thanks especially to all those folks. So Matthew left that in, told me to make sure I put that in there, Mike. I think that was after a game in which they played a team that you follow very closely in the Charlottesville area to do that. I'd intended
Be
to
a
pull
trend.
that.
You guys have the cup.
Yes, yes. Mike, any questions, comments from you from the standpoint of what you've seen here? And we'll see if we get anything from any of our group. I'll bring back up our slide there. But
I think the one thing that I'd like to share is I've done the replicating test or the because I've done both seed and spring testing my way 2 years in a row. And what the two things that I've discovered, one is moisture early, like as soon as we planted, like March, and that March time frame, as soon as you get the sprigs on the ground, was really critical to coverage, because I had two scenarios. One year I had March time frame where it was dry, and my exposed areas that were without blankets or without compost really were desiccated. I mean, they really didn't do anything when it was dry early. But if it was wet early and then dry later, which I had that scenario as well, there was no difference. But that moisture time frame, when the sprigs get on the ground, because that's when they're the most, and we know it. I mean, when we sprig normally, we saturate the field when we put the sprigs down, because we know how critical it is to have those sprigs moist as you're trying to first establish them. And it proved it out in this system. But
that was, Mike, that was one of the comments made by someone when he said, well, don't poo-poo the January, February too much, because we know we're going to get rain and snow, et cetera, January, February heading into, and maybe that's the key. And he's absolutely right, because that might be the reason to say it could work out. But for the 2 years we did and what you've already done before, it still showed that normal, whatever normal is, March precipitation certainly seems to be, it worked for us. And that was the one that grew off, quote unquote, the quickest. But again, quickest by, for me, 2 days faster for January, February compared to March. It's debatable. Does that really matter?
Well, you probably, I know you have my data in every one of my fields, that were hitting the 90%. There was no difference. I mean, you're talking a few days or whatever. And I was using the program Canopia to do that with, so that I would, wasn't my eye saying it was that point. But either the critical one was, and I think you may discover that as well, Dr. Goley, but I mean, you got to be patient with it. But the compost and blankets, you got to go with one or both. I mean, that's my point, because all the years that I just had the areas that were just the ones right into the ground, although it took maybe a year later, had 100% coverage. But having something to give those sprigs a chance to hold moisture was a factor, at least on my side. That's what I was seeing.
And I think that would always be, if you could do it, I think that makes perfect sense that you would want to do that, to put that material out there. So I agree 100%. So Michael, we've got a question here from Dr. Richardson, and he's done dormant sprigging work at Arkansas with both Bermuda and Zoysia. So Mike's comment is, worked great with both species. I actually grew in Meyer by early August, which is unheard of. And I agree with Dr. Richardson, because you compare that to normal summer planting. Yeah, you're scratching your head. They had much lower sprig mortality with dormant sprigging. Says, thanks, great work. Application of dormant seeding in sports complex makes me happy.
Well, like I said, I have not tried, Myers or any of those vegetatively. I just did the, as far as my work that I was doing, I had an embankment on one place, and I wanted to get zoysia on it because I knew I didn't want to try to mow it, or limited mowing. And so I did that with seeded, but I have not tried the vegetative. And that's an option I haven't tried. Haven't looked at.
And I would think it would work as well, and Mike has demonstrated it in Arkansas. And again, you think about achieving that amount of coverage with a slow grower like Zoysiagrass. That's why I asked Michael to talk about his buffalo grass work. Again, that's not fine turf in Virginia, but the use in those medians is something that applies almost anywhere. And you put a low input native grass, don't forget that in terms of people's perception of what they want to do that. And even with your mowing once a month rather than once a year, you've cut your mowing requirement down, 75%.
Right.
And, you give it what it needs to clean it up, get it in the shape that you want it. So it does take some investment of time and resources to get it there. But I think, as far as what you've done, I think that might be the most exciting in terms of what could impact the most people is to consider how to use these strategies, especially in these medians, in these areas in which you would love to basically take maintenance out of the equation.
People have approached me about maybe embankments and things like that. I mean, I see that as a possibility as well. Those places where you want to limit your mowing, but just know that you do have to have some type of weed control in that, because that is not an aggressive grass. And you gotta control those other outsiders, because they're gonna be faster than the buffalo grass in those scenarios. And that's the same exact word I got from Nebraska. That trying to establish and getting past the other competition was a big factor.
All right, Mike, let's see. I think a couple of other questions and answers here. And Mike comes back with a question. If you try and Roundup on your buffalo grass after establishment, we've seen that it can tolerate pretty high rates of Roundup once established. Something that we'll probably need to look at and play around a little bit to see.
I have not tried that. I know Roundup and Bermudagrass is like water, isn't it, Dr. Nutley? So
Yeah.
So haven't tried that one, but I did find out that it has a lot more, like I said, you can use tenacity as well on there, which I didn't know. So there's a lot of options on the buffalo grass I didn't know were available until I started playing with it.